held them in front of me under the yellow lighting of the clearance section. They were ugly, and I knew it, but they would help me blend and melt into the white cinder block walls of 7th grade. One part of me was thankful that I was making progress towards fitting in, because I was moving toward that Miami Vice look that was deemed so cool that year. Yeah, I know. These shoes were also one more way to avoid the hairy knuckles of the imposing wrestlers looking for any reason to stab me in the back with something sharp. The weapon of choice was a multicolored pushpin, stolen from the woodshop bulletin board. Placed in between their midland ring fingers, the pins were concealed just enough in the palm to be undetected by hall monitors, but protruded just enough to make it through whatever thin t-shirt I happened to be wearing that day. Walking back to my mother's shopping cart filled with potted plants and the many pairs of pleated slacks I talked her into buying for me, I placed the brown boat shoes into the cart with a bit of hesitation. It felt wrong. It felt like I was lying to myself. But my overwhelming sense of self-preservation managed to justify the purchase. See, the cool kids who had girlfriends and told stories of getting to third base wore boat shoes. And I never saw anyone with tight-rolled slacks, boat shoes, and a polo shirt get the shit beat out of them. They were always the hatchet men, the wrestlers, the tough guys. The kind of guys small, skinny, and girly kids like me prayed we could be friends with, and so desperately wished we could become. And I figured that maybe if I emulated their swag, I could have a piece of that bulletproof life. And I hated their music, their lack of reasoning, and their sense of style. I knew that they would look back in 10 years and regret their pleated French gold slacks and massive metal mall hair. And they were ugly. Their feathered hair and Duran Duran dance steps made me gag. And I so desperately wanted to hang on to breakdancing, which had just been deemed out and uncool by everyone else. But breakdancing made me feel alive. And sure, I may have embarrassed myself on the cardboard like a flailing idiot, but damn, I love those parachute pants, fingerless gloves, socially conscious lyrics of Grandmaster Flash. Even if I didn't know about life in the ghetto, I knew that they were speaking about real life, not this glossy dance pop that ruled a popular radio station. But now, in order to avoid punches to the spine and being called a fag, I was walking behind a shopping cart carrying a plastic pair of brown bow shoes, similar to the kind the bullies wore, only cheaper and shittier. I wanted to be able to hold my head up and walk into a gym locker room without fear, just like the assholes who pushed me around for having the same twisty boy and fashionable haircut since 4th grade, and just like the mindless kids who danced with wide eyes and gleaming smiles to the OMD If You Leave song during the school dances. See, I wanted to be like them, not in their hateful and meat-headed ways, but to be untouchable and to be noticed. I walked alongside the cart and watched as my mother took the shoes and placed them on the checkout counter. The checkout lady rang up the shoes, placed them in a bag, and handed them back to me with a smile. "Thank you," I responded. But I didn't feel good about the victory. It was merely a $10 investment to hopefully gain me entry into a clique I didn't really want to be a part of in the first place. I knew I was a fraud. And see, I wanted to be like them, not part of them. And I wanted to walk the halls free of harassment like they did. I wanted to sit at the cool kids table. I wanted to be referred to as the A squad. I wanted an identity. I wanted to feel qualified in the eyes of my peers, because I didn't in my own mirror at home. See, I had made one fatal mistake. I assumed that their lack of creativity and individuality was indicative of their inability to smell a fraud. And I was proven wrong in first period math the next day. "Baha!" cried out the jock who had an affinity for punching my kidneys. "Look at his plastic shoes!" "See, I told you once to try and fit in," his friend who sat in the desk next to him yelled out. And I wanted to die. Every single person in the class stared at me in silence while the laughing echoed throughout the room. Every girl I had a crush on, every one of my friends, they sat and they watched me take it. And I walked back to my desk and sat down. Their cackling made me wince, and I held in the tears. And I felt my face throb with embarrassment. And I gripped the sides of my desk in anger. I wanted to stand up and yell, "I did this so you would like me." But they kept laughing, and I kept my eyes on the door, praying that the teacher would walk in so that the heaviness in the room would fade. I stared out the window and made an attempt to control my heaving and fluttering lungs. It felt like days before the door opened and the teacher came in and told everyone to settle down. It was a simple day like any other. 1 minute in the lifetime of 30 people that has all been forgotten by everyone involved. Everyone but me. And I held on to that moment. And in that moment, all I wanted to do was throw the shoes out the window. I wanted to cry out, "All I want is to be like you." But I didn't. I sat there, and I took it. And while I didn't defend myself, I also didn't run. Nor did I let those tears fall. Because they were watching, and they saw the red eyes, and they kept looking back at the teacher's scribbled words on the blackboard. Whispering back and forth to each other, they covered their mouths and they giggled, and I repeated over and over in my head, "Do not fall. Please, dear God, do not let these tears fall from my eyes." And they didn't. And I never forgot that moment, because somewhere in there I felt the importance. It's like the first time you hear that one song that's so huge that you have to rush home and play it on your stereo. And while you're incapable of understanding the gravity of the moment, the volumes pass through your ears and boom and rebound in your skull. And you can feel there's something grand and epic going on. And you can't wait to spend every waking minute trying to comprehend the beauty and complexity. But you're so frustrated because your little heart still has its training wheels on and lacks the capacity to hold or understand the overwhelming significance of the moment. Yes. Me, sitting in that desk, was that epic moment. Because I didn't run. It was ironic on the way home that day, the shoes began to fall apart. The small metal rings on the sides that held in the purportedly fashionable laces came loose and stuck out like jagged little barbs. As I walked down the street, they rubbed up against my ankles. And I hated those shoes, and I couldn't wait to throw them out the minute that I walked through the door. In all of my youthful exuberance, I ran halfway home. When I eventually ran through the door to throw them in the trash, I reached down and noticed the rings had cut small gashes into my ankles. That night, while I lay in bed, I tried to figure out why that moment felt so poignant. It was my baptism into the I won't be beat spirit. It was my first flight of self-confidence. It was my first step into becoming an individual. It was the moment when a boy becomes a man, and it was my first unaided step into recognizing the beauty that is my inner strength. This was true independence and faith, and was my introduction to the glow of my heart. The next day, I walked into school wearing what I felt most comfortable in, ripped up skater gear. And as if on cue, the bullies laughed. And oh, it still hurt. And while my face burned, I noticed that my eyes didn't water. And the day after that, they laughed and my face burned less. And the day after that, my face didn't burn at all. And while I may have only been in 7th grade and possessed the confidence of a newborn duck, I realized that if I ever wanted to move that mountain of self-doubt out of my heart, I had to do it one rock at a time. And each day after that, when I walked into class and I didn't cry or feel embarrassed, my confidence grew and that mountain got smaller. Later that year, the last day before Christmas vacation, at the end of 5th period literature, my friend Billy called me over to his desk. "Dude, listen to this," he said, handing me a pair of headphones. "What's all this screamy stuff? This sucks." "Dude," I clearly ruffled his feathers. "This is the Sex Pistols. They're like totally punk rock." It sounds like a mess to me. And I hated it. It wasn't upbeat or catchy, nor could I distinguish the lyrics. But there was something in the screaming, something that I couldn't figure out. Something that, even though I couldn't make out the words, reverberated in my head. Something in that music shook me and knocked me around in a good way, like the 10 seconds after you step off of a counterbook of the world. And that vacation I was hearing a few tapes of some of the more popular punk rock bands at the time, they shook me as well. They screamed like the midnight burnout parties the drunken potheads across the street would throw on the weekends. But not exactly the same way. And I didn't want, I needed to know more about it. And it wasn't a word or a phrase or a song that snagged my heart. It was the passion with which it was being screamed. It was true art. It was the first real threat I had ever heard. It was the words I could not yet speak. It was danger and desire and fury. It was all that, and it was a dagger in the back of mediocrity and insincerity. It put the breath in my lungs and gave me a direction in which to scream. So I listened, and I learned, and I grew, and I fell in love for the first time. The music screamed into my ears and into my heart the words that described that moment in 7th grade math class, when I refused to let those tears fall. That thing that I never spoke of but kept me awake at night, that was what they screamed of. They yelled about finding glory in those hot and embarrassed faces in 7th grade. They didn't speak about love and loss and all that boring pretty boy pop the radio preached. They yelled real romance and made not fitting in a glorious feeling. To not only hold on to what makes you you, but to celebrate it. And that year I walked into school looking as ridiculous as possible. I donned everything from green mohawks to safety pins and combat boots and spike collars. And I wanted the pretty kids to see that their status in the 7th grade pecking order was hollow and built upon hypocrisy and conformity. I wanted to stand up and make them see that I wasn't a part of them, that I would never try to be, and that I would be proud of the genuine hearts that I considered true friends. What I looked for in their cliques and their parties and their lunchroom tables, I had found in myself, without their help, without anyone else. And I didn't want any part of their club, so I made my own. And I realized that their bullying and exclusionary tactics were simply a result of their inability to look at their own reflection without flinching. Every bag that fell from their lips boldly illustrated their lack of self-worth and screamed insecurity. I looked upon those kids with pity. I eventually saw them as feeble and powerless, and I never again looked to their table with envious eyes. So that when this kid looked in the mirror, he now saw a different boy. Staring back at him, he saw merit, worth, and true love for the first time. It was the beginning of a long and trying and extraordinary journey of self-discovery, and I was on a momentous yet unwavering pilgrimage to meet the man who was at the helm of this heart. And as daunting and intimidating as this journey was going to be, I was determined to meet that man and make my peace, so that one day I could look in the mirror and with all the confidence of every man that has ever walked this planet say to myself, I believe in you. That's my first